This is from the website, The Way, the Truth, and the Life. An example of Islamic deception in America from soundvision.com. Islamic information and products. http://www.soundvision.com/info/politics/jewhistory.asp. I will have this article read to you and stop at various points to show deceptions and omissions.
Muslims and Jews, a historical perspective that reveals surprises. Once upon a time, a widely circulated Jewish document described Islam as an act of God's mercy. Also, Jews in the Near East, North Africa and Spain threw their support behind advancing Muslim Arab armies. No, these aren't fairy tales or propaganda.
No, that's not propaganda. The Jews in Egypt, Morocco, and Spain were living in a Christian area and welcomed and helped the Islamic invasions. And the Islamic invasions were not manned well enough to dominate without the Jewish help. And the Jewish were given the place of overseeing the Christians and administrating the Islamic rule, even to the point in a number of places the Jews took up weapons and guarded while the Muslims army went elsewhere. So yes, this is true. The Jews ended up being the administrators for the Islamic takeovers. Yes, it was a golden age for Muslims and Jews. Churches were destroyed, Christians were beheaded, and Christians were forced, under penalty of death, to give virgins every year that were sent to harems in North Africa. But yes, the Jews had an honored position of superiority, and the Christians had to pay the tribute and submit. Up to this point, the great evil of the article is the omission. Muhammad thought that the Jews and Christians would accept him as the latest and greatest prophet, that Jesus was not the Christ, just another prophet and subordinate to Muhammad, and had all these nice surahs and prayed towards Jerusalem. But when the Qurayza tribe didn't help him in Medina in a war against his own tribe, he personally ordered the beheading of the men and boys with pubic hair and took the women and children as slaves. This was omitted, and he had the Surah of Abrogation, which says that Allah can abrogate and he'll bring something better, that what came last is what counts. And this then is confusing because they mixed the surahs up so the unbeliever, unfamiliar, wouldn't know that these nice surahs have been abrogated. Quran, Surah 2, verse 106. We do not abrogate a verse or cause it to be forgotten, except we bring forth one better than it, or similar to it. Do you not know that Allah is over all things competent?
The relationship between Muslims and Jews really was that cooperative and marked by peaceful coexistence. Just as Khalid Siddiqui of the Islamic Education and Information Center in San Jose, California, where he also teaches Islamic Studies and Arabic at Shabbat College and Alon College. Siddiqui notes that the first quote above is from S.D. Boyeen's book Jews and Arabs. The second is from Merlin Swartz's The Position of Jews in Arab Lands Following the Rise of Islam, reprinted from the Muslim World. Hartford Seminary Foundational c. 1970. Swartz also says the Muslim Arab conquest marked the dawn of a new era. Those forces that had led to the progressive isolation and disruption of Jewish life were not only checked, they were dramatically reversed. In an interview with Sound Vision, Siddiqui gave numerous examples of Jews flourishing under Muslim rule in places like Spain, Morocco, North Africa in general, and various parts of the Middle East. Siddiqui points out that Islam, as a religion, has given specific guidelines for the followers of Islam to base their relationship with any non-Muslim. These include people of scripture, like the Jews, people who belong to other religions, and even atheists. Non-Muslims must be treated on the basis of their kindness and justice, as referred to Surah 60 verse 8 of the Koran.
This is pure deception. The author knows that this surah doesn't count, that it has been abrogated. I will give you the chart showing the chronological order, even though they're mixed up. That you wouldn't know this by the natural order, but here's the chronological order from the University of Michigan. This is a list of the surahs in the Quran in chronological order. That is the order of precedence, where the surah of abrogation says that what comes latest is what really counts. Notice that surah 60 is superseded by some 23 surahs, of which one of the most important is surah number 9. Let's look at that.
Surah 9, the immunity. Point 1. This is a declaration of immunity by Allah and His Apostle towards those of the idolaters with whom you made an agreement. Point 2. So go about in the land for 4 months and know that you cannot weaken Allah and that Allah will bring disgrace to the unbelievers. Point 3. And an announcement from Allah and His Apostle to the people on the day of the greater pilgrimage that Allah and His Apostle are free from liability to the idolaters. Therefore, if you repent, it will be better for you, and if you turn back, then know that you will not weaken Allah, and announce painful punishment to those who disbelieve. Point 4. Except those of the idolaters with whom you made an agreement, then they have not failed you in anything and have not backed up anyone against you. So fulfill their agreement to the end of their term. Surely Allah loves those who are careful of their duty. Point 5. So, when the sacred months have passed away, then slay the idolaters, wherever you find them, and take them captives and besiege them and lie in wait for them in every ambush. Then, if they repent and keep up prayer and pay the poor rate, extortion, leave their way free to them. Surely Allah is forgiving, merciful. Left curly bracket. The 3 successive forbidden months mentioned by Muhammad, months in which battles are forbidden, are Dhu al-Qa'dah, Dhu al-Hijjah, and Muharram, months 11, 12, and 1. The single forbidden month is Rajab, month 7. These months were considered forbidden both within the new Islamic calendar and within the old pagan Meccan calendar. Right curly bracket.
I go on to give a little bit more about Surah 9, where it speaks specifically of Christians and Jews.
29. Fight those who do not believe in Allah, nor in the latter day, nor do they prohibit what Allah and His Apostle have prohibited, nor follow the religion of truth, out of those who have been given the book, until they pay the tax in acknowledgement of superiority and they are in a state of subjection. Point 30. And the Jews say, Ezra is the son of Allah, and the Christians say, the Messiah, Christ, is the son of Allah. These are the words of their mouths. They imitate the saying of those who disbelieved before. May Allah destroy them, how they are turned away. Point 31. They have taken their doctors of law and their monks for lords besides Allah, and also the Messiah son of Mary, and they were enjoined that they should serve one God only. There is no God but He, far from His glory be what they set up with Him.
Now let's see what it says about taking unbelievers as friends. Here we have one of 2 surahs that I'll present. Surah 3, verse 28. Let not the believers take disbelievers as allies rather than believers. And whosoever does that has nothing with Allah, except when taking precaution against them is prudence. Then Allah warns you of himself, and to Allah is the final destination. The prudence in other places in the Quran make it clear that to deceive the unbeliever is prudent. This second one makes it clear that Muslims are not to be friends, especially with Christians and Jews and other non-believers. Quran, Surah 5, verse 51. O you who believe, do not take Jews and Christians as allies. They are, in fact, allies of one another. And whoever is an ally with them among you, then indeed he is one of them. Indeed, Allah guides not the wrongdoing people. Like Surah 9, Surah 5 abrogates all the nice surahs that were before it, and they are not abrogated.
It started at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. The peaceful coexistence of Muslims and Jews began at the time of the Prophet. Siddiqui notes that the Jews welcomed the Prophet when he arrived in Medina at the time of Hijrah, migration, along with the rest of the city's inhabitants. But the Prophet had begun the step towards good relations with Jewish and other communities in Medina even before getting there. After receiving an invitation to Medina from one of the city's tribes that had accepted Islam, the Prophet signed treaties with the city's Jewish, Christian and polytheist tribes before he arrived there. These treaties clearly laid out responsibilities of each of the parties. It was based on these that the Prophet established the mythical Medina, the Constitution of Medina.
As Bernard Lewis points out, this was just another declaration of Muhammad, like the surahs. And to include it here in this context is so ludicrous, because Muhammad went on to use this constitution to exterminate all the males with pubic hair of the Jewish tribe because they didn't help him in a battle with his own pagan tribe. He ordered the beheading of somewhere around 600 men, all of the males with pubic hair. And all of the women and children of that Jewish tribe were taken as slaves. One woman was killed in the process because she was hysterical and they just murdered her. But how ludicrous. This is part of the permission that Muslims have to deceive the unbeliever so they can say whatever they want. Allah will forgive them because it is serving the Islamic goal of world domination. That permission is given in the Quran also.
Siddiqui says this was the first constitution of the world and one of the greatest political documents ever prepared by any human being. It is the oldest surviving constitution of any state. Under this constitution, any Jew who followed the Muslims was entitled to their assistance and the same rights as any one of them without any injustice or partisanship. It said the Jews are an ummah, community of believers, alongside the Muslims. The Jews have their religion and the Muslims theirs. As well, it noted that each will assist one another against any violation of this covenant.
You will note that the author leaves out the murdering of all the men Jews of that tribe and just refers to a breach of the contract.
Jews during the Muslim era, despite this early breach of contract, there are still numerous examples from Muslim history of Muslim-Jewish cooperation and coexistence. Siddiqui gave examples of how Muslim Spain, which was a golden era of creativity and advancement for Muslims, was also one for Jews. While Europe was in its dark ages and Jews were reviled there, Muslims in Spain during the same period worked side by side with Jews in developing literature, science and art. Together, they translated classical Greek texts into Arabic. This task later helped Europe move out of the dark ages and into the Renaissance.
There are two theses missing here. The first one is the ignorance of the true Christian church. The Christian church, like the Buddhist church, is something that lived and lives in the homes of farm families where children are valued and they grow in love. Just like the Amish not having a problem with autism because their children are raised to the higher levels of love. And this didn't ever die out. It keeps recreating itself wherever there's a loving environment, because any home Christian will tell you God is love. If you have this higher levels of unselfish love, it's like Christ said, where two or more are gathered in my name, I am with them. That's not just a verbal statement, it's gathered in love. And love is a predestined thing. It depends on choosing your parents well. But at any rate, the farm families around the Black Sea, early Christianity flourished and spread. It had nothing to do with the organized church, which was a corruption and reestablishment of a priesthood. But that's another thing. I won't go into that thesis now, but the Dark Ages were a time for the home Christian families, a wonderful time. And the unfortunate was the domination by the Roman Empire that decayed into oppression and conflict and destroyed much of the home Christianity by making warlords that make themselves landlords and turned the people into serfs or slaves where the family was not respected. Now, it didn't destroy the family home church completely, but it destroyed it in many areas because it took the love of a family away. They were just servants to the Lord. That's a whole nother thing. The Dark Ages were not dark. They were filled with love, and not a matter of public record, but a matter of families where they had horses and plowed the fields and had cows and chickens and pigs. And they had children that they valued because children were the ones to inherit the family farm and care for the elders when they got older. And there was the integration of generations where the parents and grandparents and great-grandparents could pass on the love and care and the stories about Christ that died so we didn't have to make animal sacrifices or go to a priest, that we could go directly to God and speak to the source of our existence, in whom we live and move and have our being. So that ignorance projected is the first thesis. The second one has to do with the Renaissance. The Renaissance, and the Muslims know this second one, that the Western culture is a degradation of humanity, not a glory. The Enlightenment, yes, there was science, and there was Newton, and degraded in the academic world today as some type of goofy Christian, but he loved the Lord. He was raised in that love and discovered much. There were other fine Christians that tried to get to know God better and learn his laws of physics and the mathematics to be able to express them. That the one thing that is missing here also is that the Muslim contempt for non-Muslim culture was real. They did develop a lot of mathematics earlier in Baghdad, as they were trying to develop a perfect moon calendar, because the Muslims used what was the old pagan moon as their religious cycle. The same as the cults and the pagan cults in the desert did. But that was why they brought all from the non-Muslim world, all the mathematicians and astronomers together at an institute in Baghdad to find a perfect moon calendar, which was ludicrous in the first place because the moon has an unstable orbit due to the tides. But that's a whole nother thing. Like the library in Alexandria was destroyed when the Muslims invaded, because if it wasn't part of the Islamic creation, it didn't matter. And the Muslim authorities destroyed Western literature. It was the Jews in Spain that preserved it in Arabic. And many of the texts still exist. And yes, the worldly Christian church often destroyed the literature too, but that's a whole nother story. But Renaissance, this is the second theory. Renaissance was a continuation of the corruption, degradation of affluence in the Roman culture. And go back, there are two main genetic foundations of the destruction of human culture. One is the Islamofascism based on the male domination from the simple hunter-gatherer reality for a couple million years. It was the dominant males that tended to make babies. And so that genetic nature persisted. We know from breeding cows and dogs, it doesn't take all that long to put a genetic trait in something by selection. But the other side was most men died in battle. Well, up to 60% of the hunter-gatherers died in battle, and the main purpose of battle is attacking another tribe to get their young women. So the women that tended to survive were the ones who were attractive and welcomed the invader and used manipulation with the priest or chief or whoever to have some power because of their physical weakness. And they also learned that with the development of verbal logical language and cause-effect relationships, where the great apes care for their young, they don't have a problem with infanticide, and many nurse their young till the second molars, which is equivalent to 5 or 6 years old. Why are human females refuse to do that? And if they get money, they hire somebody, or they want to abort their child. That was the development of logical verbal language with cause-effect relationship. The female woman learned that the child was a product of the rape, and the millions of years of rape left a resentment towards the male. Yes, there's an attraction, because the ones that were attracted and went along to get along were the ones that tended to have babies. But this conflict, we have many parts. Each life stage is stored at a different place in our brain, and there's different brain components. We're not an entity. Women have the capacity to love just like a female dog does, or a pig. They are mammals, but they also have the ability to hate their child and project their hate for the rape onto the child, which is a genetic thing. Most of the male behavior of working in groups is a cultural thing. That's why the Vikings were so highly respected. They had learned to work in groups in hunting the woolly mammoth back thousands of years, and then building large boats to haul the couple thousand pounds of meat from one mammoth. They built boats to Salem. You can find the mammoth bone homes not too far from where I'm at right now in Russia, but and along the Don River in Ukraine. But that's another thing. That male working together is what succeeded, but that was a relatively recent event in human development, and it's cultural. Now you can see in Sweden that's gone, but in an earlier time, it built honor amongst the Vikings, was honor of men working together and fathers training the sons. There was a Viking settlements in Spain that the Muslims could never conquer, because the Viking men could work together as a team. But that's a whole nother thing you could look into. But the integrity that they had from their work ethic and their culture of training the young men to have integrity, that they could work together as part of a team, gave them a culture such that the Byzantine Empire even hired pagan Vikings to fight for them, because they were so could work together, had integrity, and could be trusted. Not only that, in the Ukraine, which Russia, in an earlier time in the 700s-800s, the Vikings had conquered the Russians and subjugated them, and then withdrew. And the Russian lords had so much conflict while the Vikings were ruling over them. They had honor and integrity. They invited the Vikings back. And the Russians had a very high culture until they were invaded by the nomads and the Muslims. And that's a whole nother story, how it degraded the farm family and the home, made female slaves and all kinds of nonsense that always, just like in the American West, the ranchers fought with the farmers. It builds a different culture if you're, what do you call, where they don't have a settled home, but go around with herds or hunting. It brings out that fierceness of culture of male domination, which is where the Turkish come from. But and the same with the Arabs, so that fits together well with Islam, the Islamo-fascist thing. But on the other side, the female resentment of their children is real. They want daycare, they want babysitters, they don't want to breastfeed, they want to bottle feed the child. And autism has gone up exponential. Now it's 1 boy in 50. It used to be non-existent when I was born for all practical purposes, and it's still amongst healthy farm families like the Amish, where there's generational love. It's for all practical purposes non-existent. Well, the point here is the Renaissance was really a degradation from unselfish love and love of children to not even able to love a husband or a wife, but love self, narcissism. And look at me, look at my dance, look at my art. Oh, me, I'm great, I'm wonderful. And then wanting children to be a projection, like soccer moms or dads. The point is, affluence leads to the destruction of healthy homes. And that's what the Renaissance was. It was a degradation. That's why the loving farm families escaped from it. That's where they talk about the Amish like they were a sudden creation. No, home home, real Christian love has always existed, but not recognized logically, verbally, and was used to say you've got to go through a priest and all these kinds of things. That corruption that happened with quote, civilization as they built cities and children lost the family love in place of honoring the family that they have in a farm family where they're the next generation. But at any rate, that is the thesis about Renaissance, that affluence is the end point of culture and civilization, where the affluent that is the powerful, become so corrupted generationally that they're unable to care or have integrity, and it spells the downfall of a society. Now, the Muslims know that Western culture is corrupt and decaying, but they don't know that they're the opposite end of the stick. Both ends are golden.
Jews flourished under Muslim rule in Egypt as well, where they achieved very high positions in government. Siddiqui quotes some lines from an Arab poet of that time to illustrate, "Today the Jews have reached the summit of their hopes and have become aristocrats. Power and riches have they, and from them counselors and princes are chosen."
This was true in Egypt of the time when the Christians were the majority and the Muslims used the Jews as their administrators, their bookkeepers, their money collectors, their enforcers. And they had a place of power over the Christians.
Today, the forced expulsion of Palestinians from their homeland has destroyed good Muslim-Jewish relations. So what happened? Although not the only cause, a large part of the deterioration in Muslim-Jewish relations comes from the emergence of Zionism, the forced expulsion of Palestinians from their homeland by Zionist Jews and British colonizers, as well as their continuing oppression. Siddiqui says, while this reaction results in anti-Jewish feeling, it must be seen in its proper historical context. It must be remembered that anti-Jewish sentiments insofar as it is to be found in the contemporary Arab world is strictly a modern phenomenon and one that runs counter to the time-honored Islamic tradition of fraternity and tolerance.
This again is just lying to the unbeliever. It's sanctioned many places in the Quran to deceive the unbeliever, like in Surah 2 verse 226 or Surah 66 verses 1 and 2.
The very widespread popular notion that present-day Arab-Jewish hostility is but another chapter in a long history of mutual animosity is totally false. If there is one thing the past makes clear, it is precisely that Arabs and Jews can live together peacefully and in a mutually beneficial relationship. History also makes it very clear that they are the heirs to the Islamic tradition of openness and tolerance.
Again, this is true in a period when non-Muslims are helpful to the cause of spreading the world domination of Islam for the sake of Allah. But when that need is over with, read Surah 9, slay the idolater wherever you will find him.
The key to re-establishing good relations between Muslims and Jews again is justice, notes Siddiqui. This principle is foreign to neither Islam nor Judaism. In Islam, standing up for justice, he points out, must be done, even if it is against ourselves, our parents, our kin, the rich or the poor. This is clearly mentioned in the Quran, 4135.
Again, look at the chart and you will see that Surah 4 is abrogated.
Siddiqui points out that the emphasis on justice is also mentioned in Jewish scripture in the prophecies of Michael in chapter 3, Zion shall be redeemed with justice and by those who will come to her with righteousness.
The author may be confused here, I'm not sure, but Michael is the archangel mentioned in the Jewish book of Daniel. But when I word search the Jewish scripture, the only place I find the words Zion shall be redeemed is in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 27. Zion shall be redeemed with judgment, and her converts with righteousness. So I have no clue where this man got his reference from. The overall message here is just plain false. The historical record, Islam being spread by violence and murder, has continued. The record is there of the deaths wherever Islam is spread, and it's still the same today. The killing going on in Nigeria as Boko Haram goes on, the killing going on in the Philippines, the killing going on in Pakistan. They've already murdered all of the non-Muslims in Pakistani-administered Kashmir, and this same brutal part of human nature that is given permission in the service to Allah, it has the Sunnis killing Shiites. The Sunnis have blown up over 80 mosques, over 80 Shiite mosques in Pakistan, murdering thousands. And that's since 9/11. This history, yes, if there was a period of no advancement, or that Islam had been defeated and pushed back, there was a period of peace. But that Islam is peaceful. Read Surah 9. Read these unabrogated surahs. This is a preposterous lie. The part of Jews flourishing under Muslim rule in the Middle East was true as the Muslims were advancing over the Christian areas. The Muslims did not have the majority in many areas when they moved in, and they used the Jews as their administrators and enforcers. And the harsh conditions caused many Jews to convert to Islam, but the conditions were much harsher for the Christians. They were either exterminated, like in Turkey. It's very hard to find Christians today. There's been an ongoing trial. 3 young men brutally tortured and murdered for printing Bibles. And the Islamist government has used their torture and murder, which was born out of their philosophy and hate for non-Muslim belief that Jesus was the Christ. These murders occurred in 2007, and the murderers were caught at the scene, but they're still not finished the trial because the Erdogan government is using it to manipulate and hide the fact that it was his supporters that did it, and he's using it. That the Erdogan government used their murders to blame on the secularist military establishment, and many of them are in jail today. But that's a whole other point. The point is the Jews relatively flourished as the Muslims advanced because they were the Muslims' helpers. Now we go to a false picture that's taught in every school and university in Western Europe and America. That is the glorification of Islamic Spain.
We lounge beneath the pomegranates, palm trees, apple trees, under every lovely leafy thing, and walk among the vines, enjoy the splendid faces we will see in a lofty palace built of noble stones.
Over 1,000 years ago, the sun-washed land of southern Spain was home to Jews, Christians, and Muslims living together and flourishing. Their culture and beliefs intertwined, and the knowledge of the ancients was gathered and reborn. Here were the very seeds of the Renaissance. But this world too quickly vanished. Greed, fear, and intolerance swept it away. Puritanical judgments and absolutism snuffed out the light of learning. Within a few centuries, the fragile union of these people dissipated like smoke. The time of tolerance was lost forever. In the 5th century, Rome is sacked by a tribe of Visigoths, driven by their need for land and plunder. All over Europe, barbarian tribes descend upon the once great Roman Empire.
The western lands of the Roman Empire, what we now call France, Germany, Spain, Portugal, England, those regions collapsed first. They were abandoned by Roman legions first.
And with the empire's decline, Europe enters a new age.
Historians don't like to use any longer the phrase Dark Ages. But truth be told, there was a lot that was dark about this time. The Roman Empire collapses. There's not as much trade. Many libraries are pillaged and wrecked, and some of the great classics disappear.
That this is a false picture of history and a false picture of reality is true. But I will not have time here to give the in-depth background of early Christianity and the natural origin of peaceful religion like Buddhism and Christianity, but to say the background here for Europe. Christianity, home Christianity, family, church, not a public matter, families getting together, the home church, the private family church, flourished in the Black Sea area, in the Ukraine, where there were individual family farms, and that culture of Christ and love, which the love was not from Christ. The love was from the family that valued the children because they were the ones that were going to take over the farm, the horses, the cows, the pigs, the chickens. And they were the ones that were going to care for the elders in their old age. So the children were a valued part of the family working team. And out of this close working relationship came care and discipline and elevation in levels of caring that led to a peaceful, loving spirit that is indigenous to family farming, where they have their own private land and live in peace and are able to care for themselves and produce more than what they need. And they then ended up selling and getting involved in the commercial world. But the real destruction of this background being so widespread, it spread to the Goths. And the Goths had settled and had family farms. But the Roman invasions and Romans setting up landlords tended to degrade in the areas where this was established. And the farm families would move into a safer area. Not all, but this Christianity was not Catholic, had nothing to do with priests, and is not even part of history except being mentioned in some Roman letters. But the corruption of it is just the endemic problem of the affluence and the endemic problem of warfare, where the generals would become lords and they would take possession of the land and turn the loving family farmers into serfs and slaves. Again, even to the point then with Muslim invasions, there was sexual abuse. But the corruption of the Goths, not all, many moved off with their private family Christian farming life, but the Goths became organized under warlords with the breakdown of the Roman Church, and then sometimes against the oppression of the Roman Church and their form of government. But the background was still strong enough that the Goths were able to make a warfare and take over Spain. They went in, they were called Arians because of the Arius, Bishop Arius had nothing to do with their background. They were just simple, background was simple home Christianity, but and not this priesthood indoctrination of the Catholic Church. But that's the background. Yes, the Franks came in, the Visigoths came in, and they were corrupted from their original foundation. But the corruption of the oppression, the affluence of the Muslims and the Jews, and the oppression of the Christians being beheaded, having to supply virgins for the harems, and this was a terrible situation. The Jews flourished, and the Visigoths come in, and the Franks come in and take over, and they convert to Roman Catholicism. They accept the priesthood. It had nothing to do with Christ's home church and direct relationship with God, but that's what happened. And then, because the Jews had been the Antichrist oppressors of the Christians, the Muslims were forced off. The Jews either had to convert, or there was the Inquisition. Not just Jews, no more of this Antichrist Islam and Judaism. So they had the Inquisition to deal with this criminal culture that had been so oppressive to the Christians. And the Christian culture was corrupted. Just look at the Spanish invasion. And I have a Mexican son-in-law, but look at all the beheadings in Mexico. That's a corruption that still went on with the Spanish culture, and the corruption of affluence, because the affluent Spanish lords, of course, had wet nurses and babysitters, so their eldest son inherited the estate, and the other sons of this neglected affluence that were narcissistic with the power of their family became priests and generals, and went off to make themselves harems in the New World. But that's another story. To call everything that goes under the name of Christianity is just a plain an error. The corruption of affluence is real. But now, getting back to the Jews, many of the Jews found other Jews in Northern Europe, and the same thing had been done by the corrupt lords and Normans, taking the Jews and using them as overseers and rent collectors and enforcers, while they made themselves landlords and had the serfs or slaves, no longer family farms. It was an oppression, just like my mother came from the Peltons, and if you trace back the history to England, it goes to Lord Pelton. Everybody that he owned had the last name of Pelton. It didn't mean they were related. It meant that they were his serfs. Now here's the key: the corruption of history. The affluence and the intellectualism of the Jews is without question. The memorization for 2,000-3,000 years and the learning gave a lot of abstract skill. No denying that. The Muslims destroyed much of the Western history is true, and that the invading Visigoths didn't have a lot of respect for the Roman literature and the intellectual history. That's true. But here were these Jews being oppressed and forced to convert back from Islam and Judaism to Christianity. Many escaped and went to Northern Europe, where the Jewish there were being used in the same ways by the landlords to keep control over the serfs. And they found a way of life there. And now, many times the Jewish, if you study the Jewish in Ukraine, they became independent farm families and were very loving, and many converted to Christianity in this loving environment of a private farm family. It's indigenous to the environment. The ranchers and nomads have always been brought out the warlike nature and our genetic potential for the men. And farm families have brought out this loving mammalian nature of both men and women, and the natural respect for children because they're valued. So that's the background, but the intellectual corruption of history by this Jewish hatred for the Catholic Church, I never understood. I was taught this hatred. It's part of the Lutheran religion, and even though my grandfather and grandmother on both sides had become home church Christians, they came from, on my father's side, came from a Lutheran background. And and I grew up in a German farm town where this Lutheran contempt for Catholicism was part of the culture. But it went back to these Jews escaping the Inquisition and migrating to Northern Europe with the hate for the Catholic Church and the glorification of Spain, which is a false history. Thank you.